What do you do when you have a long time to wait? Why, you set an alarm. The Sentinel by Arthur C. Clarke. Read by Karl. The next time you see the full moon high in the south, look carefully at its right-hand edge and let your eye travel upward along the curve of the disk. Round about 2 o'clock, you will notice a small dark oval. Anyone with normal eyesight can find it quite easily. It's the Great Walled Plain, one of the finest on the moon, known as the Mare Crisium, the Sea of Crises. 300 miles in diameter and almost completely surrounded by a ring of magnificent mountains. Never been explored until we entered it in the late summer of 1996. Our expedition was a large one. We had 2 heavy freighters which informed our supplies and equipment from the main lunar base in the Mare Serenitatis, 500 miles away. Also, 3 small rockets were intended for short-range transport over regions which our surface vehicles couldn't cross. Luckily, most of the Mare Crisium is very flat. There are none of the great crevasses so common and so dangerous elsewhere. Very few craters or mountains of any size. As far as we could tell, our powerful caterpillar tractor would have no difficulty to take us wherever we wished to go. I was geologist, or selenologist if you want to be pedantic, in charge of the group exploring the southern region of the Mare. We crossed 100 miles of it in a week, skirting the foothills of the mountains along the shore of what was once the ancient sea, some 1,000 million years before. When life was begun on Earth, it was already dying here. The waters were retreating down the flanks of those stupendous cliffs, retreating into the empty heart of the moon. Over the line we were crossing, the tideless ocean had once been half a mile deep, and now the only trace of moisture was the hoarfrost one could sometimes find in caves with the searing sunlight that never penetrated. We began our journey early in the slow lunar dawn, stepping almost a week of Earth time before nightfall. Half a dozen times a day we would leave our vehicle and go inside in the spacesuits to hunt for interesting minerals or to place markers for the guidance of future travelers. It was an uneventful routine. Nothing hazardous or even particularly exciting about lunar exploration. We could live comfortably for over a month on our pressurized tractors. If we ran into trouble, we could always radio for help and sit tight until one of the spaceships came to our rescue. I said just now there's nothing exciting about lunar exploration, but of course that isn't true. One could never get tired of those incredible mountains, so much more rugged than the gentle hills of Earth. We never knew, as we rounded the capes and promontories of that vanished sea, what new splendors would be revealed to us. The whole southern curve of the Mare Crisium is a vast delta, where a score of rivers once found their way into the ocean, fed perhaps by the torrential rains that must have lashed the mountains on the brief volcanic age when the moon was young. Each of these ancient valleys was an invitation, challenging us to climb into the unknown uplands beyond. But we had 100 miles still to cover, and we could only look longingly at the heights which others miscale. We kept Earth time above the tractor, and precisely at 2200 hours the final radio message would be sent out to base, and we were closed down for the day. Outside, the rocks would still be burning beneath the almost vertical sun, but to us it was night until we awoke again 8 hours later. Then one of us would prepare breakfast, there would be a great buzzing of electric razors, and someone would switch on the shortwave radio from Earth. Indeed, when the smell of frying sausages began to fill the cabin, it wasn't hard to believe we were not back in our own world. Everything was so normal and homely, apart from the feeling of decreased weight and the unnatural slowness with which objects fell. It was my turn to prepare breakfast in the corner of the main cabin that served as a galley. I can remember the moment quite vividly after all these years, for the radio just played one of my favorite melodies, the old West Air David of the White Rock. Our driver was already outside in his spacesuit, inspecting our caterpillar treads. My assistant, Louis Garnett, was up forward on the control position, making some belated entries in yesterday's log. As I stood by the frying pan, waiting, like any terrestrial housewife, for the sausages to brown, let my gaze wander idly over the mountain walls which covered the whole of the southern horizon, marching out of sight to east and west below the curve of the moon. They seemed only a mile or 2 from the tractor, but I knew the nearest was 20 miles away. On the moon, of course, there is no loss of detail with distance, none of that almost imperceptible haziness which softens and sometimes transfigures all far-off things on Earth. These mountains were 10,000 feet high, and they climbed sleepily out of the plane as if ages ago some subterranean eruption had smashed them skyward to the molten crust. The base of even the nearest was hidden from sight by the steeply curving surface of the plane, for the moon is a very little world, where our stunning horizon was only 2 miles away. Lifting my eyes towards the peaks which no man had ever climbed, the peaks which, before the coming of terrestrial life, had watched the retreating oceans sink sullenly into their graves, taking with them the hope and morning promise of a world. The sunlight was beating against those ramparts with a glare that hurt the eyes. Yet only a little way above them the stars were shining steadily, and the sky blacker than a winter midnight on Earth. I was turning away when my eye caught a metallic glitter, high in the ridge of a great promontory, thrusting out into the sea 30 miles to the west. It was a dimensionless point of light, as if a star had been called from the sky by one of those cruel peaks, and I imagined some smooth rock surface was catching the sunlight and heliographing it straight into my eyes. Such things were not uncommon. When the moon is in her second quarter, observers on Earth can sometimes see the great ranges in the Oceanus Procellarum burning with a blue-white iridescence, as the sunlight flashes from their slopes and leaps again from world to world. But I was curious to know what kind of rock could be shining so brightly up there. I climbed to the observation turret and swung our 4-inch telescope round to the west. I could see just enough to tantalize me. Clear and sharp on the field of vision, the mountain peak seemed only half a mile away, but whatever was catching the sunlight was too small to be resolved. Yet it seemed to have an elusive symmetry. The summit upon which it rested was curiously flat. I stared for a long time at that glittering enigma, straining my eyes into space, until presently a smell of burning from the galley told me that our breakfast sausages had made their 250,000-mile journey in vain. All that morning we argued away across the Mare Crisium while the western mountains reared higher in the sky. Even when we were out prospecting in the spacesuits, the discussion would continue over the radio. It was absolutely certain, my companions argued, that there had been any form of intelligent life on the moon. The only things that ever existed there were a few primitive plants and their slightly less degenerate ancestors. I knew that as well as anyone, but there are times when a scientist will not be afraid to make a fool of himself. "Listen," I said at last, "I'm going up there, if only for my own peace of mind. That mountain is less than 12,000 feet high. It's only 2,000 under Earth's gravity, and I can make the trip in 20 hours at the outside. I always wanted to go up on those hills anyway. This gives me an excellent excuse." "If you won't break your neck," said Garrett, "you'll be the laughing stock of the expedition when we get back to base. That mountain will probably be called Wilson's Folly from now on." "I won't break my neck," I said firmly. "Who was the first man to find Pico and Helicon?" "Weren't you rather younger in those days?" asked Louis gently. "That," I said with great dignity, "is as good a reason as any for going." We went to bed early that night, after driving the tractor to within half a mile of the promontory. Garnet was coming with me in the morning. He was a good climber and often been with me on such exploits before. Our driver was only too glad to be left in charge of the machine. At first sight, these cliffs seemed completely unscalable, but to anyone with a good head for heights, climbing is easy in a world where weights are only 1/6 of the number value. The real danger in lunar mountaineering lies in overconfidence. A 600-foot drop on the moon can kill you just as thoroughly as a 100-foot fall on Earth. We made our first halt on a wide ledge about 4,000 feet above the plain. Climbing had not been very difficult, but my limbs were stiff with the unaccustomed effort, and I was glad of the rest. We could still see the tractors of a tiny metal insect far down the foot of the cliff. We reported our progress to the driver for starting on the next descent. Inside our suits it was comfortably cool, for the refrigeration units were fighting the fierce sun, carrying away the body heat of our exertions. We still spoke to each other, except to pass climbing instructions to discuss our best plan of ascent. I didn't know what Garnet was thinking. Probably this was the craziest goose chase he had ever embarked upon. I more than half agreed with him, but the joy of climbing, the knowledge that no man had ever gone this way before, and the exhilaration of the steadily widening landscape gave me all the reward I needed. I don't think I was particularly excited when I saw in front of us the wall of rock I first inspected through the telescope from 30 miles away. It would level off about 50 feet above our heads, and the other plateau would be the thing that allured me over these barren wastes. It was almost certainly nothing more than a boulder splintered as it goes by a falling meteor, and with its cleavage flames still fresh and bright in this incorruptible, unchanging silence. There were no handholds on the rock face, and we had to use a grapnel. My tired arms seemed to gain new strength as I swung the 3-pound metal anchor around my head and sent it sailing up towards the stars. The first time it broke loose, it came falling back slowly when we pulled the rope. On the third attempt, the prongs gripped firmly and our combined weights could not shift it. Garnet looked at me anxiously. I could tell he wanted to go first, but I smiled at him through the glass of the helmet and shook my head. Slowly, taking my time, I began the final ascent. Even with my spacesuit, I weighed only 50 pounds here, so I put myself up hand over hand without bothering to use my feet. At the rim, I paused and waved to my companion, scrambled over the edge and stood upright, staring ahead of me. You must understand, until this very moment, I had been almost completely convinced there could be nothing strange or unusual for me to find there. Almost, but not quite. It was that haunting doubt that had driven me forward. Well, it was a doubt no longer, but the haunting had scarcely begun. I was standing on a plateau perhaps 100 feet across. It had once been smooth, too smooth to be natural, but flying meteors had pitted and scarred its surface through immeasurable eons. It had been leveled to support a glittering, rough pyramidal structure twice as high as a man that was set in the rock like a gigantic, many-faceted jewel. Probably no emotion at all filled my mind those first few seconds. Then I felt a great lifting of my heart, and now a strange, inexpressible joy. For I loved the moon, and now I knew the creeping moss of Aristarchus and Eratosthenes was not the only life she had brought forth in her youth. The old discredited dream of the first explorers was true. There had, after all, been a lunar expedition, and I was the first to find it. Though I had come perhaps 100 million years too late did not distress me. It was enough to have come at all. My mind was beginning to function normally, to analyze and ask questions. Was this a building? A shrine? Something for which my language had no name? If a building, why was it erected in so uniquely inaccessible a spot? I wondered if it might be a temple, and I could picture the adepts of some strange priesthood calling on their gods to preserve them as the life of the moon ebbed with the dying ocean, and calling on their gods in vain. I took a dozen steps forward to examine the thing more closely, but some sense of caution kept me from going too near. I knew a little of archaeology, and tried to ignore the cultural level of the civilization that must have smoothed this mountain and raised the glittering mirror surfaces that still dazzled my eyes. The Egyptians could have done it, I thought, if the workmen had possessed whatever strange materials these far more ancient architects had used. Because of the thing's smallness, it didn't occur to me it might be like the headwork of a race more advanced than my own. The idea the moon had possessed intelligence at all was still too tremendous to grasp, and my pride would not let me take the final humiliating plunge. And I noticed something that sent the scalp crawling in the back of my neck. Something so trivial and so innocent that many would never have noticed it at all. I've said the plateau was scarred by meteors. It was almost coated inches deep with the cosmic dust that is always filtering down the surface of any world when there are no winds to disturb it. Yet the dust and the meteor scratches ended quite abruptly, in a white circle enclosing the little pyramid, as though an invisible wall was protecting it from the ravages of time when the slow and ceaseless bombardments from space. There was somebody shouting on my earphones. I realized Garnet had been calling me for some time. I walked on suddenly to the edge of the cliff and signaled him to join me, not trusting myself to speak. Then I went back towards that circle in the dust. I picked up a fragment of splintered rock and tossed it gently towards the shining enigma. If the pebble had vanished at an invisible barrier, I should not have been surprised. But it seemed to hit a smooth hemispherical surface and slide gently to the ground. I knew then I was looking at nothing that could be matched in the antiquity of my own race. This was not a building, but a machine, protecting herself with forces that had challenged eternity. These forces, whatever they might be, were still operating, and perhaps I had already come too close. Thought of all the radiations men had tapped and tamed in the past century. For all I knew, I might be as irrevocably doomed as if I had stepped into the silent aura of an unshielded atomic pile. I remember turning in towards Garnet, who had joined me and was now standing motionless at my side. He seemed quite oblivious to me, so I did not disturb him, but watched to the edge of the cliff in an effort to marshal my thoughts. There below me were the uh, mare, the Chrysium, the crises indeed. Strange and weird to most men, but reassuringly familiar to me. Lifted my eyes towards the crescent earth lying in her cradle of stars, and wondered what the clouds had covered when these unknown builders had finished their work. Was it the steaming jungle of the Carboniferous, the bleak shoreline over which the first amphibians must crawl to conquer the land? Or earlier still, the long loneliness before the coming of life? Do not ask me why I did not guess the truth sooner. It seems so obvious now. In the first excitement of discovery, I had assumed without question this crystalline apparition had been built by some race belonging to the moon's remote past. But suddenly, and with overwhelming force, the belief came to me it was an alien to the moon as I myself. In 20 years we have found no trace of life but a few degenerate planets. No lunar civilization, whatever its doom, could have left but a single token of its existence. I looked at the shining pyramid again, the more remote it seemed from anything that had to do with the moon. Suddenly I felt myself shaking with a foolish hysterical laughter brought on by excitement and overexertion. For I imagined the little pyramid was speaking to me and was saying, "Sorry, I'm a stranger here myself. It has taken us 20 years to crack that invisible shield and reach the machine inside those crystal walls. What we couldn't understand, we broke at last with the savage might of atomic power, and now I have seen the fragments of the lovely glittering thing I found up there in the mountains. They are meaningless. The mechanisms, if indeed they are mechanisms, of the pyramid belong to a technology that lies far beyond the horizon, perhaps to the technology of paraphysical forces. The mystery haunts us all the more now that other planets have been reached. We know that only life has ever been the home of intelligent life in our universe. No Kanani lost civilization of our own world has built that machine, but the thickness of the meteoric dust on the plateau has enabled us to measure its age. It was set there upon its mountain before life had emerged from the seas of Earth. When our world was half its present age, something through the stars, swept through the solar system, left its tokens of its passage and went again upon its way. Until we destroyed it, that machine was still fulfilling the purpose of its builders, and so that purpose, here is my guess. Nearly 1,000,000,000 stars are turning in the center of the Milky Way. Long ago, other races on the world of other suns must have scaled and passed those heights we have reached. Think of such civilizations, far back in time as the fading afterglow of creation. Masters of a universe so young that life as yet had come only to a handful of worlds. Theirs would have been a loneliness we cannot imagine. Loneliness of gods stretching looking out across infinity, finding none to share their thoughts. They must have searched the star clusters as we have searched the planets. Everywhere there were big worlds, they would be empty, or peopled with crawling, mindless things. Such was our own Earth. The smoke of the great volcanoes still standing in the skies, when that first ship of the peoples of the dawn came sliding in from the abyss beyond Pluto. It passed the frozen outer worlds, knowing life could play no part in their destinies. Came to rest among the inner planets, warming themselves around the fire of the sun and waiting for their stories to begin. These wanderers must have looked upon Earth, circling safely in the zero zone between fire and ice, and must have guessed it was the favorite of the sun's children. Here in the distant future would be intelligence, but there were countless stars before them still, and they might never come this way again. So they left a sentinel. One of millions they have scattered through the universe, watching over all worlds with the promise of life. It was a beacon that went down the ages, patiently signaling the fact that no one had discovered it. Perhaps you understand now why that crystal pyramid was set upon the moon instead of on the earth. Its builders are not concerned with races still struggling up some savagery. They would be interested in our civilization only if we proved our fitness to survive, by crossing space and so escaping from the Earth, our cradle. That is a challenge that all intelligent races must meet sooner or later. It is a double challenge, for it depends in turn on the conquest of atomic energy and the last choice between life and death. Once we had passed that crisis, it was only a matter of time before we found the pyramid and forced it open. Now its signals have ceased, and those whose duty it is will be turning their minds upon Earth. Perhaps they wish to help our infant the civilization. But they must be very, very old, and the old are often insanely jealous of the young. I can never now look at the Milky Way without wondering from which of these banked clouds of stars the emissaries are coming. If you will pardon so commonplace a simile, We have set off the fire alarm and have nothing to do but wait. I do not think we will have to wait for long. The end.